The morning light through Meridian Trust's tall windows fell across the marble floor in long, clean panels. The kind of light that only exists in buildings where money has been aging for generations. Friday morning on Madison Avenue, 7:47 in the morning, the kind of time when the city is just beginning to move before the chaos sets in, when everything still whispers instead of shouts. The bank was busy, but the kind of busy that moved without noise. Attorneys in tailored coats checked their phones. Fund managers glanced at their watches. Private wealth clients were being escorted toward the elevators that led to the upper floors. Floors where decisions about billions were made in conference rooms the size of small houses. Everyone in the lobby either belonged there or knew how to look like they did. Marcus Williams did not look like he belonged. He wore a blue button-down shirt that had been washed so many times the collar had gone soft. Not from luxury, from use. The kind of soft that comes from being loved by a washing machine worn gently by hands that had learned to make things last. His jeans were dark but faded at the knees. His sneakers had lost most of their shape around the heels, where his feet pressed every day as he walked the electrical grid of the city at night. But there was something in the way he moved that contradicted everything about his appearance. He walked without hurry. The way a man walks when he has nothing to prove and nowhere to arrive faster than he already is. His shoulders were straight. His eyes were clear. He didn't scan the room nervously. He simply existed in it, taking up his portion of space and no more asking nothing from the marble or the light. The girl beside him was 7 years old, though she carried herself like someone slightly older. The way only children who have known real grief ever do. Her name was Zara. She wore a simple yellow dress with small sunflowers embroidered along the hem. The dress had been Amara's favorite fabric choice for her daughter. Picked out in a hospital room, 3 days before she died. Folded carefully in a bag that Marcus had never put away. Zara held a small sketchbook tucked under one arm. She looked up every so often at her father. Not out of worry, out of habit. The kind of habit two people develop when they understand each other completely, when words become almost unnecessary because the rhythm has been established. They had done this walk before, in the same clothes at the same time every year on April 15th. They would do it again next year and the year after that. For as long as Marcus could manage, it was the one constant in a life that had taught him constants were not guaranteed. Marcus approached the teller station. Station 3. The middle one. He didn't choose it consciously, he simply ended up there. And it felt right. Sarah Chen was the teller at Station 3. She was 26 years old. 8 months into her first real banking job. She had kept her face composed for so long that the professionalism had stopped feeling like performance and had become something closer to a second skin. But Sarah was also someone who had moved through the world in a way that made her acquainted with how quickly it sorts people, and how often it sorts them wrongly. She noticed things other people didn't. She noticed the way Marcus held his daughter's hand. Zara opened her sketchbook on the marble ledge. She settled into that particular stillness that children develop when they have learned that grown-up errands take time. Her pencil was already in her hand, and she began to draw. The ocean. No. A river. A blue line that was meant to be water. Marcus rested his hand gently on the counter. His hand was large, weathered. The hand of someone who worked with infrastructure and systems, who understood how to maintain things so they would continue functioning. On his ring finger under his left sleeve, catching the light only when he shifted, was a thin silver wedding band. He still wore it. He would always wear it. "Good morning," Marcus said. His voice was low. The kind of low that does not need to be loud to be heard. It carried something else. Not authority exactly, but authenticity. The quiet of someone who has nothing to perform. "I'd like to make a withdrawal, please." $60. Sarah gave him the small professional smile she had been trained to give. The smile that was neither warm nor cold, but perfectly calibrated for a transaction. "Of course. Do you have your account information?" He slid a worn card across the counter. The plastic was faded, creased from being held in the same pocket for years. Sarah took it without looking at him twice. She tapped in the number. The screen loaded. It was April 15th. 3 years and 11 months since Amara Williams had been buried under a small maple tree in a cemetery in Westchester County, in the section reserved for people under 40. 3 years and 11 months since Marcus had learned that death was not dramatic when it actually happened. It was quiet. It was a hand going still. It was a heart stopping after months of forewarning. And every year on this date, without variation, without deviation, Marcus and Zara came into the city with the same list in his pocket, written in the same pen, in the same handwriting, on the same folded index card he refused to replace even though the paper was becoming delicate. $18 for a bouquet of sunflowers from the shop on Bleecker Street, the one Amara used to stop at every Saturday morning, just to look at the colors before she would buy the ones she liked. $12 for 2 cones at the little ice cream place near the Hudson River, where the light came in sideways through the windows and made everything look golden. The place where Marcus had first told Amara he loved her. And she had laughed and said, "I know you keep telling me," even though it was the first time he had actually said it out loud. A few dollars for paper and colored markers, so Zara could decorate the small paper boat she would fold by hand, the boat that would carry a message from her to her mother. The rest every single year would go into the donation box in the lobby of the hospital where Amara had spent her final 4 months, the place where nurses who didn't know her had become familiar with her name, with her laugh, with the particular way she held Marcus's hand even when the pain was so bad she could barely squeeze. The total always came to exactly $60, not 59, not 61. Amara had done the mathematics. Amara, who had never been particularly good at math, had figured out the exact amount and written it down in her careful handwriting, and given Marcus the card, and said, "Every year on this date, $60, it has to be cash, it has to be held in your hand. Because the things that matter most have to be held by hand. And not everything can be digital. Not a text, not a promise, hand to hand." So he came in for the cash. Every year. $3.65 per location, one after another. A ritual that took the entire day. The sunflowers, the ice cream, the paper boat, the donation. Everything by hand, everything held, everything done in the presence of his daughter, so that Zara would understand. Years later when she was older and the loss had become historical instead of immediate, that there were people worth holding on to, even after they were gone. Sarah processed the withdrawal without hesitation. But in that moment of hesitation, in the space where she might have asked questions, something in her expression shifted. It was subtle, invisible to most people, but it was there. She reached for the bills, 3 20s, and placed them carefully in a small paper envelope, the kind that was used for cash withdrawals that meant something. "There you are, sir," she said, and there was something in her voice that wasn't just professional courtesy. There was recognition, the kind of recognition that comes from seeing something real in a world of transactions. Behind them, 3 clients deep in the silent line, a woman in a grey Chanel suit laughed out loud. It was not a small laugh. It was not a contained laugh. It was the kind of laugh someone in a certain position allows herself when she is performing for a new audience. The kind that carries across a lobby and makes the people near the door look up from their phones. The kind of laugh that says, "I'm so secure in my position that I can make fun of anyone, and it will be fine." Victoria Hastings was 45 years old. Her suit cost $8,500. Her heels were Louboutin, and the red soles flashed against the marble floor with every step she took. A habit that had been so ingrained by now that she didn't even notice she was doing it. The red-soled heels had become the punctuation mark of her life. The period that ended every statement she made with her body. She had grown up in a small town outside Cleveland, Ohio. She had worn thrift store shoes to her first job interview. She had eaten saltine crackers for 3 days to pay for bus fare to the city. She had clawed her way up through night classes and unpaid internships until she built Hastings Capital into a $4 billion firm with a waiting list of institutional investors, high net worth individuals who wanted her expertise. She had told herself once a long time ago that she would never forget what it felt like to be looked at the way the world had once looked at her. That she would hold on to the hunger. That she would remember. But forgetting is quiet work. It happens a little at a time. It happens in small moments. The first time you fly first class and don't feel grateful. The first time you order something expensive without checking the price. The first time you look at someone with less and feel relief that you're not them anymore. It happens so gradually that you don't even notice it's happening. Until one morning you wake up and realize you've become exactly the person you were most afraid of becoming. Victoria had been looking at her phone when Marcus asked for his $60. She had been reviewing an email from Harold Whitmore, the manager of a $300 million family office, who was still deciding whether he trusted her enough to move his fund into her hands. Harold was the kind of old money that had been old for long enough, that it had stopped being impressed by anything. He had a theory about Victoria. She'd forgotten where she came from. And he didn't trust people like that. He didn't trust them because they were unpredictable. You could never know what they would sacrifice if it meant staying at the top. Victoria's junior assistant stood beside her, holding a leather folder. She had brought the presentation materials for the morning's pitch to Harold. Everything was in that folder. Market analyses, performance history, the track record of Hastings Capital broken down into digestible charts. Everything that proved she was worth the $300 million investment. And then she heard the word 60, and something in her had shifted, like a lens adjusting on a camera, bringing something into sudden focus. She had turned her head. She had seen Marcus at the counter. She had seen the way he held his daughter's hand. She had seen the small yellow dress with the sunflowers. She had seen him ask for $60 like it was a normal request. Like he wasn't standing in a bank where the average transaction involved at least 7 figures. Something in Victoria's chest had cracked. Just a small crack. Like the smallest fissure in a dam. Not enough to cause any real damage. Just enough to make her aware that there was pressure behind the wall she had built. And then she had laughed. The laugh had come out before she could think about whether it was appropriate. The laugh had carried across the lobby loud enough for Richard Whitmore to look at her and then look away quickly, uncomfortable. Richard was a man who had once been married to a woman who was kind, and the marriage had ended because Richard couldn't keep up with her kindness. He had spent 15 years trying to understand where she got it from. He had spent 15 years failing. $60, Victoria had said, turning toward Harold with a smile that was sharp as broken glass. My morning coffee costs more than his annual banking needs. Shouldn't he use the ATM on 57th Street? I'm sure it would be faster for everyone. A man in a charcoal suit standing near the pillar smiled and let out a short sound that was almost a laugh. But not quite the kind of noise people make when they are trying to side with genuine amusement. It was the kind of noise that people make when they are trying to side with power without fully committing to it. A younger woman in line, maybe in her 30s, had glanced at Marcus and then looked away quickly, afraid of being associated with what was happening. A second laugh had bloomed softer from somewhere near the rope line, not because the joke was funny, because laughing along felt safer than standing apart. Zara's pencil had stopped on the page. The little girl had been drawing a small paper boat on a blue line that was meant to be a river. Her pencil had stopped in the middle of a letter. She had tilted her face toward her father. In that careful way that 7-year-olds do when they are trying to understand a thing that grown-ups have not explained, Daddy. Her voice had been very small. Did we do something wrong? Marcus had crouched down so his eyes were level with hers. He had not glanced at Victoria. He had not glanced at the man in the charcoal suit. He had not glanced at any of the people whose judgment was hanging in the air like a cloud. He had placed his hand lightly on Zara's shoulder. and the thin silver wedding band on his ring finger had caught one thin line of window light and held it. "No, sweetheart," he had said. His voice was the same voice he used when he was explaining things to her before bed, when he was reading stories that her mother had loved, when he was telling her about Amara in the present tense so that Zara would grow up knowing her mother as a person, not just as an absence. "We're doing exactly the right thing." Zara had studied his face for a moment. She had found whatever it was that 7-year-old children need to find when they trust someone completely. Some confirmation that the world was not fundamentally broken. She had nodded. She had returned to her drawing. On the page, the small paper boat now carried the beginning of a message along its side, written in the careful block letters of a child who had been practicing her handwriting. The letters were deliberate. They were intentional. They were the kind of letters that a child writes when she understands that what she is writing matters. Sarah Chen's fingers had paused on the keyboard for just one moment, not long enough for most people to notice. But Victoria had noticed, and so had everyone in the lobby who was actually paying attention instead of just standing in the line. There had been something in the teller's expression that made Victoria curious despite herself. Not sympathy, something else. Something that looked almost like recognition. The kind of recognition that comes from knowing something about a situation that the person in front of you doesn't understand yet. Victoria had turned back to Harold, but her attention had split. One part of her still managing the conversation about the $300 million fund. One part of her watching the marble counter. One part of her wondering why a bank teller in Manhattan was looking at a $60 withdrawal like it meant something. Like it was more than just a transaction. She would have her answer, just not the way she expected. Sarah processed the transaction with a reverence that would have seemed strange if anyone had been looking closely enough to notice. She slid the small paper envelope across the counter toward Marcus. 320s crisp and new, folded carefully. "There you are," she said quietly. And then even more quietly. Because she had learned that some things needed to be said in a way that only the person who needed to hear them would hear. "I hope this brings you what you need." Marcus nodded. He understood that she understood. He had learned over the past 4 years that there were other people in the world who had loved someone and lost them. And sometimes those people could recognize the ritual in each other without explanation. April 15th was not a random date. It was not something Marcus had chosen. It had been chosen by someone else. Someone who had understood even as she was dying what would matter most after she was gone. Amara Williams had been 38 years old when she died. She had been Marcus's wife for 12 years before that. They had met in college, Marcus studying electrical engineering, Amara studying literature, and they had recognized in each other something that felt like home, the kind of home that is not a place but a person, the kind of home that you can carry inside your chest. Amara had been beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with how she looked. She had been beautiful in the way she listened, in the way she laughed, in the way she could make anyone in a room feel like their story mattered. She had been the kind of woman who made you want to be better, not because she demanded it, but because being around her made you want to deserve her. 3 days before she died, Amara had been lying in the hospital bed in the semi-private room on the 4th floor. The pain had been so bad by then that she was in and out of consciousness. The doctors said she had weeks, maybe months, but Amara had known better. She had a way of understanding her own body that was almost prophetic. She had looked at Marcus, actually looked at him, eyes clear despite the medication, and she had said, "I want you to do something for me." After anything Marcus had said, he would have agreed to anything. "Every year on this date, I want you to come to the city. I want you to spend $60 exactly, not 99, not 80, exactly 60. And it has to be cash. It has to be in your hand. Because the things that matter most have to be held by hand. And not everything can be digital. Not everything can be done through a screen. What do I do with the $60? Marcus had asked. You come to the place where we first said I love you, Amara had said. You buy ice cream, you get me sunflowers from the shop on Bleecker, you let Zara fold a paper boat, you donate the rest to the place where I'm spending my last months. You make it a day, you make it a ritual, you make it something that means something. I don't understand, Marcus had said. I know Amara had said, but you will. She had died 2 days later. It had taken Marcus 2 months to understand. 2 months of grief so thick he could barely breathe through it. 2 months of learning how to be a father and a mother. And the person who kept Zara safe, while also being the person who was breaking apart. But when he finally understood, when he finally recognized what Amara had been asking him to do, something shifted in him. She hadn't been asking him to preserve her memory. She had been asking him to build something real. Something that would mean something to Zara. Something that would connect Zara to the mother she would never remember. Because Zara had been so young when Amara died that her memories would be fragmentary, scattered, incomplete. But if Marcus did this every year, Zara would grow up knowing that there was someone who had loved her so much. That she had planned even while dying how to stay present in her daughter's life. How to keep teaching her things. How to pass on the understanding that there were people worth holding on to, worth honoring, worth making time for even after they were gone. So every year on April 15th, Marcus and Zara came to the city. They took the subway from Washington Heights, where they lived in a 1-bedroom apartment that Marcus had slowly transformed into a place that felt safe. They arrived at Meridian Trust at 7:47 in the morning. They withdrew exactly $60, and then the day began. First stop, the flower shop on Bleecker Street. The woman who worked there knew them by now. She always had sunflowers ready. She had a way of arranging them, loose and wild, the way Amara had preferred them, and she never charged them full price. It's for a good cause, she would say, and Marcus would understand that she understood. Second stop, the ice cream place near the Hudson. They would sit in the window booth and watch the light come through sideways. They would eat the ice cream slowly, taking their time. Because this was not about consumption, it was about presence. Zara would always order strawberry, because strawberry was her mother's flavor. Marcus would order vanilla, because it was what he had ordered on the day he first told Amara he loved her. Somewhere in the middle, Zara would fold a paper boat. She had become quite good at it by now. Her folds were precise, her edges were clean, and on the side of the boat she would write a message. Sometimes it was, "Happy birthday, Mommy," sometimes it was, "I love you," sometimes it was just her name. Zara. Final stop, the hospital. The donation box was in the lobby, right there by the information desk, a small wooden box with a slot for cash. Marcus would approach it, and Zara would place the remaining money. Whatever was left of the $60 after flowers and ice cream and the paper boat, into the box. They would stand there for a moment silently, and then they would turn and walk back out into the city, back toward the subway, back toward home. It was the structure of grief transformed into ritual. It was Amara's last gift to both of them. As Sarah processed the transaction, as she slid the envelope across the counter, with that particular reverence, the question of Marcus's life hung in the air like something invisible but present. Marcus Williams was 42 years old. He had been born and raised in Harlem, in a building that had seen better days, with a mother who had worked 2 jobs to put him through school, with a father who had left when Marcus was 3. He had grown up understanding that life was not promised, that you had to work for everything you had, that the world was not arranged for the benefit of people who looked like him. He had worked the night shift for the city's Department of Electrical Infrastructure for the past 11 years. He was a night shift supervisor now, which meant he spent his evenings walking through the city's electrical grid, checking systems, responding to problems. ensuring that the lights stayed on in other people's lives, while he drove home in the darkness. The job was stable, the hours were punishing, the pay was enough, as long as enough didn't require too precise a definition, as long as you didn't think too much about the fact that he made roughly $43,000 a year, which was enough to feed himself and his daughter, and pay the rent on a one-bedroom apartment in a neighborhood that was still in transition, still being reclaimed by people who had more money than he did. Raising Zara alone had not been the plan. Plans, he had learned, were something you made before you understood what life actually cost. His ex-wife, not ex technically. But the woman he had been married to when Amara was dying had left quietly, 3 months after Amara's death, when Marcus was still so lost in grief that he barely noticed she was going until she was gone. She had left a note. I can't do this version of things she had written. Marcus had not asked her to explain which version she meant. He had simply accepted that some people cannot stay, that sometimes love is not enough to keep someone in a place that is too painful. But Amara had stayed. In a way, Amara had refused to leave, not because she wanted to be alive. The pain by the end was so bad that she had stopped wanting to be alive, but because she had refused to leave her daughter without something to hold on to. So she had left instructions, she had left a ritual, she had left a map. Every night when Marcus came home from the night shift, the first thing he did was check on Zara. He would enter the apartment quietly, moving through the darkness, and he would go to her bedroom and place his hand on her small chest, to feel her breathing, to confirm that she was still here, still alive, still his responsibility. He would stand there in the dark for as long as he needed to stand there, and then he would go into his own bedroom and sleep, or try to sleep, knowing that in 12 hours he would be awake and with Zara again, and in 12 hours after that he would be at work again, maintaining the grid, keeping the lights on, doing the work that nobody thought about until the lights went out. He had applied once to an advanced electrical engineering program through the city. It was a 2-year track that could have moved him from maintenance into design, from fixing the grid to building it. It was the kind of opportunity that came along maybe once in a decade. He had filled out the application carefully. He had written the essays. He had prepared for the interview. And then he had withdrawn his application 4 days before the deadline. His reason was simple and devastating. There was no one to pick Zara up from school on the days his shift ran long. There was no one to be with her from 3 in the afternoon until he got home from work. And he could not ask for that. He could not sacrifice her safety, her certainty that her father would be there when she needed him, for his own ambition. He had told himself he would apply again next cycle. He had not. He had learned in the way of many men who had quietly absorbed too many losses to be extremely good at convincing himself that he was fine, that this was enough, that Zara was enough, that the work of maintaining the grid was meaningful work, even if it would never move him anywhere, even if he would spend the rest of his life doing the same job at the same pay with the same limited options. He was fine. He had learned to say this and believe it, but somewhere deep in the part of him that he had learned not to listen to, he knew it was a lie. As Victoria stood in the bank lobby pretending to listen to Harold describe his concerns about her firm's recent performance, something in her awareness had fractured. It was subtle. It was a crack in her focus. But it was there. She was watching Marcus and Zara. Harold was saying something about market volatility and the need for stability in fund management. Harold was saying something about trust, and about how you couldn't trust people who changed their values depending on what was convenient. Harold was speaking directly to his concerns about Victoria, about the fact that she had built her reputation on a kind of ruthlessness that worried him. He was wondering if she would abandon him just as easily as she had abandoned everyone else, if it meant staying at the top. But Victoria was not really listening. Victoria was watching the way Marcus had crouched down to be level with his daughter. She was watching the way he had placed his hand on the girl's shoulder. She was watching the silver wedding band catch the light. She was watching his lips move as he said something that made the girl's face change. The fear leaving, being replaced by trust. Something in that moment had reached into Victoria's chest and done something she didn't expect. It had made her feel something she had not allowed herself to feel in a very long time. She had felt lonely, and instead of sitting with that feeling, instead of asking herself what it meant, she had done what she always did when she felt something dangerous. She had laughed. She had made the moment into a joke. She had covered the crack with sharp words and sharper wit. She had laughed at Marcus for asking for $60. She had made it into something ridiculous. She had used her position, her power, her wealth as a weapon. And it had worked. The people around her had laughed too. The moment had passed. The crack had been sealed over again. But not completely. Because Sarah Chen, the bank teller, had looked at Marcus the way Amara's doctors had looked at her in those final days. With the recognition of someone who understands that they are witnessing something real, something that mattered, something that transcended the ordinary transactions of money and power. And Victoria had noticed that look. She had felt curious about it. She had felt unsettled by it. Richard Whitmore, as Victoria continued to talk, had made his decision. He had decided that Victoria had indeed forgotten where she came from. He had decided that he could not trust someone who had become what Victoria had become. He had decided to move his $300 million fund, and Victoria, surprising herself, had not fought him on it. She had simply nodded and accepted it. For the first time in 25 years, when confronted with a loss of power, Victoria Hastings had simply let something go. 7 days later, Marcus and Zara returned to Meridian Trust. This time it was not for the ritual. This time it was because Robert Chen, the director of client services, had called Marcus on Tuesday and asked if he would be interested in participating in something called the Civic Engagement Initiative. It was marketing, really. Meridian wanted to feature stories of real people for their annual report. They wanted to show that they cared about community, that they understood that banking was not just about transactions, but about people. Marcus could have said no, but he had learned that opportunities sometimes came from unexpected places. He had learned that you said yes to things, even when you didn't fully understand them, because you never knew where they might lead. So he had agreed. He arrived at the bank at 8:15 in the morning. 5 minutes before his appointment with Robert, Zara wore the same yellow dress. The one with the sunflowers. It was her favorite. It was the dress Amara had picked out in a hospital room, imagining her daughter wearing it in a future that Amara would not see. It had become sacred, in the way that objects become sacred when they carry memory. They stood in the lobby waiting. Victoria walked through at 8:47 a.m., heading to a client meeting on the 12th floor. She was moving quickly, checking her phone, her mind already in the meeting that was waiting for her. She did not see Marcus at first. The lobby was busy, the day was full. She was moving through her life the way she always moved through it, from one moment of importance to the next, from one meeting that would determine whether she succeeded or failed at the thing she was trying to do. Then she saw the yellow dress. Everything in her stopped. It was the same yellow dress from 1 week ago. It was the dress that had haunted her for 7 days. It was the dress that belonged to a child whose face she could not stop thinking about, even though she barely knew the child, even though she had only seen the child once, for less than 30 seconds, in the middle of a bank lobby where she had been cruel and performative and everything she was most ashamed of being. She had spent 7 days not thinking about them, which meant she had spent 7 days thinking about them constantly. Her hand tightened on her folder. Her pace slowed. For just a moment she was not moving forward. For just a moment she was considering turning around, walking back the way she had come, avoiding the second encounter. But she did not turn around. Instead, she continued forward. Zara felt her father's hand tighten infinitesimally on hers. Just a small pressure, barely noticeable. She looked up at him, and he was looking at Victoria. He had recognized her before she had fully seen them. He was waiting to see what she would do. This had become his way. To wait, to observe, to let people show him who they really were through their choices. Victoria moved forward. She had to. Harold was waiting on the 12th floor. She had a presentation to give. She had a life to maintain. She had a reputation that was precariously balanced on every decision she made, every moment she inhabited, but as she passed them. Close enough to smell sunflowers. Close enough to hear the small sound of Zara's breathing. Close enough to see the morning light catching on Marcus's silver wedding band. She made a mistake. She looked directly at Zara's face. Zara looked back. Not with fear, not with anger, not with the understanding of a child who had been hurt by a cruel adult. Zara looked with simple curiosity. The kind of curiosity that comes from a child who has been taught that people are worth looking at, that everyone has a story. That judgment is something that comes later, if it comes at all. It was the opposite of what Victoria expected. It broke something in her. She walked to the elevator without speaking, but her hand was shaking as she pressed the button for the 12th floor. Her heart was racing. By the time the elevator doors closed, she was breathing like she had run up a flight of stairs. In the elevator alone with her reflection, the polished doors, Victoria Hastings stood very still and allowed herself to feel the full weight of what she had chosen to become. 11 o'clock at night. Victoria's penthouse apartment on the Upper East Side. The kind of apartment that people sold their souls to afford. The kind of apartment where the windows looked out over the entire city, where the floors were heated marble, where every object was curated by someone who understood that wealth was about creating an environment. That reflected a certain kind of taste, a certain kind of status, a certain kind of success. Victoria sat at her kitchen counter with her laptop open. She was wearing an expensive silk robe. Her hair was down. She looked smaller this way, without the armor of her work clothes, without the sharp edges of her power suit. She had pulled up the article again. The Vanity Fair piece from 18 years ago. The one that had made her famous in a way. The one that had first established her as someone worth paying attention to. The girl who understood that Ohio was not a destination, it was a warning. She read, the hunger in her eyes, the certainty that nothing and no one would stop her. The particular kind of cruelty that comes from someone who has decided that mercy is weakness and attachment is death. She closed the laptop. She opened it again. She closed it again. She went to her bedroom and opened a drawer she had not touched in 7 years. It was at the back of her closet, in a space that most people would not think to look. Inside was a photograph, faded slightly, creased at the corners from being held too many times. Her at 19 years old, standing in front of First National's offices in Cleveland, Ohio. The building behind her was gray and undistinguished. The sky was overcast, and there on her feet were her shoes. They were taped. Actually taped. The left heel was coming apart. Gray duct tape held the sole to the rest of the shoe. The right heel was cracked and split. She had filled it in with ink from a pen, trying to make it look intentional instead of damaged. That girl in the photograph, she had no idea what was coming. She had no idea that in 5 years she would be running her own investment firm. She had no idea that in 10 years she would be on the cover of business magazines. She had no idea that in 20 years she would be sitting in a penthouse apartment, looking at a photograph of herself, and wondering where the person in the photograph had gone. She had just known that she could not stay in Ohio. She had just known that staying meant being destroyed by the weight of poverty, by the limitations of the place she was from, by the low expectations that people had for girls like her. She had just known that she had to leave, and that leaving meant becoming something different, something harder, something that could not be touched by the things that had touched her before. She had succeeded, she had left, she had become, but something had gotten lost in the becoming. She sat on her bed with the photograph in her hands and thought about Zara's face in the elevator. She thought about how open that face was, how trusting, how unguarded. She thought about how that girl would probably grow up to be kind, because that was what Marcus was teaching her. That was what her mother, the mother that Victoria knew nothing about, but somehow intuited, had taught Marcus before she died. Victoria thought about her own childhood. She thought about her own mother. She thought about the moment when her mother had stopped trying to protect her and had started resenting her instead, resenting the fact that Victoria took her attention, that Victoria demanded things, that Victoria made her life harder instead of easier. She thought about how around age 7 or 8 her mother had simply stopped holding her hand. She had learned very young that affection was a liability. She had learned that the way to survive was to become invulnerable. She had learned that love was weakness, and weakness got you destroyed. At 2 a.m., Victoria called a therapist. She had researched this therapist 6 months ago and never called. She had his number saved in her phone. She had been saving it the way you save something you might need someday, but are afraid to use. "I need an appointment," she said, when his voicemail picked up at 2 in the morning. "As soon as possible. I need to talk about what I was before I forgot it completely." His office called her back at 9 a.m. She got an appointment for Tuesday. But Monday night, Victoria did something she had not done since she was 25 years old. She cried. Not the controlled tears of someone maintaining composure, not the strategic tears of someone using emotion as a tool, but actual crying, messy crying, the kind of crying that comes from deep inside, from the places you don't want to go, from the person you were before you learned how to protect yourself. She cried for the girl in the photograph. She cried for every person she had hurt, because she was afraid of being hurt herself. She cried for every time she had laughed at someone, because they had less than her, because laughing made her feel safer than the alternative, which was admitting that she was terrified of becoming them, of losing everything, of being exposed as the fraud she had always suspected she was. By 3 o'clock in the morning, the crying had stopped, but the rupture remained. Something fundamental had broken open, and Victoria understood with a clarity that was almost painful that she could not go back to being who she was before. The question was whether she could become something different. 2 weeks passed. In those 2 weeks, Victoria went to therapy. She sat in a man's office, Dr. Morrison, 48 years old, someone who had spent 20 years listening to people tell him about the damage they had done. And she talked about her mother. She talked about Cleveland. She talked about the taped shoes. She talked about the moment she had become successful, and realized it didn't feel like success. It felt like running from something, constantly running, never arriving anywhere except further from the person she had been. She talked about Marcus, about the yellow dress, about the way that little girl had looked at her in the elevator. "I'm trying to understand," Victoria said, "how you become someone so feared that when you laugh at someone, everyone laughs with you. And you realize in that moment that you have created a world where no one will tell you the truth anymore. No one will be honest with you because honesty has consequences." "What kind of consequences?" Dr. Morrison asked. "Rejection," Victoria said. "Failure, the understanding that I am not actually as special as I have convinced myself I am." Dr. Morrison was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "What if the work is not about being special, but about being real?" Victoria cried again in his office. By the 3rd session, she had made a decision. She was going to quit 2 board positions. She was going to stop the practices that had made her successful, but that had also made her cruel. She was going to find a way to use the power she had accumulated for something other than accumulating more power. It was terrifying. It was also the first thing she had done in 25 years that felt like it might actually matter. On a Tuesday morning, 2 weeks after the elevator encounter, Victoria positioned herself in the Meridian Trust lobby at 8 a.m. She was not there for a meeting. She was there to wait. She had observed after the second encounter that Marcus sometimes came in on Tuesday mornings. She did not know why. She did not know what he was doing there. But she knew that if she waited long enough, there was a chance she would see him again. She stood in a corner pretending to look at her phone, pretending to be waiting for someone. She was terrified that he would see her and understand that she was stalking him. She was terrified of what his judgment would be if he realized that she was thinking about him constantly, that she was unable to move forward in her life until she had somehow resolved what had happened in that bank lobby, until she had somehow found a way to be different. At 8:23, the elevator doors opened. Marcus entered with Zara. This time Zara was not wearing the yellow dress. She was wearing regular clothes, a blue shirt and jeans. Marcus was carrying a folder. They moved with purpose, like they were there for a specific reason, not just for the ritual of the withdrawal. Marcus stopped when he saw Victoria. He did not walk away. He did not approach. He simply acknowledged her presence with the smallest nod, the kind of nod that says, "I see you. I'm aware of you and I'm choosing not to engage." This nod destroyed her. She had prepared a speech. She had rehearsed it in front of a mirror. She had written it out on a piece of paper and edited it and rewritten it until the words felt perfect. She had prepared an apology that was carefully constructed, that was designed to show she understood what she had done. That was meant to open a door towards something like reconciliation. None of it mattered. Because the thing about genuinely encountering someone you have hurt is that all of your preparation becomes irrelevant. All of your rehearsal becomes useless. What actually matters is your response in the moment, and Victoria found that she had no response that felt real. She stood in the corner of the bank lobby and felt tears start to form in her eyes. Zara looked at her with simple curiosity, with innocence, with the absolute lack of judgment that only a child could offer. Victoria excused herself and walked toward the bathroom. By the time she reached it, the tears were flowing. She locked herself in a stall and sat on the toilet, and allowed herself to break completely. She sat there for 5 minutes, or maybe it was 20. Time had lost meaning. The only thing that was real was the understanding that was crystallizing inside her. Sharp and clear and unavoidable. This was not about apology. This was not about being forgiven. This was about transformation, and transformation could not be rushed. Transformation was work. It was the daily choice to be different than you were yesterday. It was the acceptance that you might never actually be forgiven, that you might spend the rest of your life trying to make amends for what you had done. And that might be the point. That might be exactly what was supposed to happen. She emerged from the bathroom and walked directly out of the bank, toward the street, into the bright morning light. She walked until she found a coffee shop. She sat down with a cup of coffee she did not drink, and she opened her phone, and she started writing. She was going to give an interview. She was going to tell the truth about who she was and what she had become. She was going to stop hiding. She was going to stop performing. And she was going to accept whatever consequences came from honesty. 3 weeks after the second collision, Marcus received a handwritten note. It arrived at his apartment in Washington Heights, in an envelope addressed in careful handwriting. The envelope contained a single card. "Would you meet with me?" Victoria had written. "I understand if you say no. I have no right to ask." Marcus read the note to Zara. He asked her what she thought he should do. Zara had said something that surprised him. "She's still sad. Sad people sometimes need help." So Marcus had called the number on the back of the card and agreed to meet. They met at a coffee shop in Brooklyn, near the courthouse. Not the kind of place where people like Victoria usually went. Not sleek, not expensive, not designed to impress. Just a place where real people drank coffee and read books and did their lives in a public space. Marcus ordered black coffee. He did not drink it. He held the cup, warming his hands around it, using it as something to do. Victoria ordered coffee and didn't touch it either. They sat in a corner booth under fluorescent lights that made everything look worse than it actually was. The walls were painted a tired beige. The tables were laminate, scarred from years of use. Someone had carved initials into the wood. Someone else had drawn a heart. The world in miniature. In a coffee shop in Brooklyn. "I don't know how to do this," Victoria said. And her voice was smaller than Marcus had heard it in the bank. "I prepared things I was going to say. I forgot all of them in the elevator on the way down." Marcus waited. "I'm sorry," she said. "About the bank, about your daughter." She stopped, because saying what she was actually sorry about seemed to require acknowledging things she had not fully acknowledged yet. "I don't think that sentence belongs to me yet," she said instead. "I don't think I've earned it yet." Marcus set his coffee cup down very slowly. The sound of it against the saucer was loud in the quiet coffee shop. "I'm not going to tell you it's okay," he said. "You hurt my child by laughing at us. Not deeply, not in a way that will stay with her, thank God. But you hurt her, and you hurt me. And you hurt everyone in that lobby who had to decide whether to laugh with you or stand apart." Victoria nodded. She did not defend herself. She did not explain. She simply listened. But my wife Marcus continued. "Amara, the mother of my child, who is dead now, who has been dead for 4 years. She read an article about a girl from Ohio once. She believed in that girl. She said to me, 'That one's not finished becoming yet.' That was you, wasn't it?" Victoria could not speak. "I'm trying to figure out," Marcus said quietly. "If that girl still exists, or if she died somewhere in all the money." "I'm trying to find out too," Victoria said. The conversation lasted 47 minutes. Marcus spoke about Amara. He spoke about the ritual. He spoke about Zara and about what he was trying to teach her. He spoke about the understanding that sometimes people hurt you, not because they are evil, but because they are afraid, because they have convinced themselves that cruelty is the price of survival. Victoria spoke about her childhood. She spoke about her mother. She spoke about the moment she had become successful and realized it felt like dying, like the person she had been was being erased in order to make room for the person she was becoming. She spoke about the therapy. She spoke about the terrible understanding that she could not go back, that she could only move forward, and that moving forward meant accepting that there were some things she had broken that might never fully be repaired. When Marcus stood to leave, he placed a $10 bill on the table, enough to cover both coffees and a small tip. "I have to get home," he said. "My daughter. And you have work to do." It was not a goodbye. It was a period at the end of a sentence. Victoria watched him walk out onto the Brooklyn street. She sat at the table for another hour, trying to understand what had just happened. And then in her car, sitting alone and shaking, she finally understood. He had not forgiven her. Maybe he never would forgive her. But he had given her something more valuable than forgiveness. He had given her permission to change. He had given her the understanding that there was a version of her that was worth becoming, and that the work of becoming that version would be the hardest thing she ever did. Forgiveness was something she would have to earn separately, and that she understood was exactly as it should be. 3 months passed. In the first month, Victoria gave an interview. It was 11,000 words. She told the story of the 19-year-old girl with the tape shoes for the first time in print. She told the story of the Friday morning at Meridian Trust. She did not come off well in either story. She did not defend herself. She did not explain her reasoning or her circumstances. She simply told the truth. The response was complicated. Some people praised her for her honesty. Some people criticized her for not going far enough in her apology. Some people questioned her motives, wondering if this was another form of performance, another way of controlling her narrative. She accepted all of it. She understood that she no longer got to control how people perceived her. That was the price of having spent 20 years making sure everyone was terrified of her. In the second month, Victoria launched what she called the Ashford Mentorship Program. No foundation, no gala, no photographers, no press release announcing it, just a simple program. 18 women from working class backgrounds, selected not because of their credentials, but because they reminded her of herself at a particular age. Hungry, desperate, willing to do whatever it took to escape. Each woman received 1 year of one-on-one coaching. Each woman received direct introductions to people who mattered in the financial world. Each woman received a stipend, not a scholarship, but an actual monthly payment. That covered the gap between what their entry-level salaries paid and what the unspoken expectations of the financial services industry demanded. You could not afford an apartment in the city on an entry-level salary. You could not buy the kinds of clothes that the industry expected you to wear. You could not live the way you needed to live to be taken seriously. So Victoria paid for it. She lost contracts. 2 major clients pulled their funds. Uncomfortable with what she was doing, seeing it as politically motivated, seeing it as a betrayal of the values they had hired her for. She lost 3 board positions. She had been asked to step down from all of them, politely, with language about exploring new directions and focusing on emerging interests. In the 3rd month, Victoria was mentoring a young woman named Keisha. Keisha was 24 years old. She had grown up in the Bronx. Her shoes once had been taped. She had worked her way through community college. She was brilliant. The kind of brilliant that comes from having to be smarter than everyone else just to be taken seriously. She was also angry. She was angry at the world. She was angry at the systems that had not been designed for her. She was angry at herself for being angry, because anger is not an emotion that successful women are supposed to feel. "Why are you doing this?" Keisha had asked her in one of their meetings. "You don't even know me. You don't owe me anything. Why are you spending your time on this? I knew someone like you," Victoria had said, a long time ago. She forgot how to be hungry. She became cruel instead. She spent 25 years trying to prove that she was better than where she came from, and she forgot that where she came from made her who she was. "I don't want you to become that. You're trying to teach me the opposite of what you learned," Keisha had said. "Yes," Victoria had said. Exactly. Keisha had ended up at the design firm of a woman named Sarah Chen, who had once been a mentee of Victoria's, who understood what it meant to come from nothing. Keisha flourished. She was brilliant at her work. But more importantly, she was kind. She was fierce and kind at the same time, which Victoria had come to understand was the hardest thing to achieve. It was easy to be one or the other. It was nearly impossible to be both. When Harold Whitmore returned, the man who had pulled his $300 million fund, he did not return to ask for his fund back. He returned to observe. He wanted to watch what Victoria was doing from a distance. He wanted to understand if this was genuine or if it was a performance. After 3 months of observation, he asked Victoria to coffee. "I've been watching from a distance," he said. "What you're doing, it looks like work. Real work, not PR. It is the hardest thing I've ever done," Victoria said. "Good," Harold said. "That probably means you're finally doing something real." He did not give her back his $300 million fund, but he donated $100,000 to the program. It was a small gesture really in terms of money, but it was a significant gesture in terms of belief. He was saying, I see you. I'm choosing to believe in you. I'm not going to help you completely recover your losses. But I'm going to help you understand that what you're building might be more valuable than what you had before. When Victoria lost contracts, she did not fight to keep them. When she lost board positions, she did not defend herself. When people question her motives, she simply said, I don't know if my motives are pure. I'm trying to become someone real, and I don't know if that person will ever be pure, but at least I'm trying. For the first time in 25 years, she discovered something that had nothing to do with power or status or money. She discovered that you could lose the things you thought defined you and still be okay. In fact, you might be more okay. You might sleep through the night. You might look at yourself in the mirror and recognize the person looking back. Marcus called Victoria on a Tuesday morning. It was not something she expected. She had accepted that she might never hear from him again, that she might spend the rest of her life trying to make amends to someone she would never see again. She had accepted that this might be the price. I want to show you something, he said, when she picked up the phone. They met at his apartment in Washington Heights. It was a one-bedroom, modest, everything worn but clean. The kind of space that people spend their salaries on. That represents not luxury but safety. The understanding that a roof over your head is the most basic requirement of a life. Zara was at school. Marcus had called into work. He was taking the day off to do this. He pulled out a portfolio of Zara's drawings. Page after page of them. The small paper boat that she folded every year. The sunflowers. Marcus holding Amara's hand. Amara in a hospital bed. The yellow dress with sunflowers. Hands holding hands. Water. Light. All rendered in the way that children render the world. Not with accuracy, but with emotional truth. The final drawing was different. It was a house, rendered in crayon and colored pencil, under a deep blue sky, and in front of the house were three figures, holding hands. One of the figures was clearly Marcus, one was clearly a child, Zara, and one was a figure in a grey shape, rendered in purple crayon, which was Zara's way of drawing grey. Zara drew this last week, Marcus said. She said, that's when we're all okay. He did not say who we were, but they both understood. Victoria looked at the drawing for a very long time. She could not speak. Why are you showing me this? She finally asked. Marcus said, because my wife believed in people becoming better, and my daughter has inherited that belief, and I'm trying to decide if I should too. I went through the mentorship program applications. I read about the 18 women you're working with. I watched an interview where you talked about being ashamed of who you became. And I'm wondering if maybe Amara would have believed in you too. Victoria cried. For maybe the 5th or 6th time since she had allowed herself to cry again, she wept. But this time Marcus was there to witness it. This time she was not alone. I'm going to keep working, she said. I'm going to keep failing at this and trying again. I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to become the person I was supposed to be. Marcus nodded. That's all anyone can do, he said. 1 month later, spring festival at Jefferson Elementary. The same multi-purpose room where Zara had spent so many of her days. This was the day when students displayed their artwork, when parents came to celebrate, when the school community gathered to witness the creations of the children. The room was transformed. Student paintings covered every wall. Watercolor trees, crayon self-portraits, clay sculptures, paper lanterns swayed gently from the ceiling. Parents wandered through with punch cups and paper plates of cookies, chatting in clusters beneath the fluorescent lights. Marcus and Zara walked in together. As they entered, they felt eyes on them. The same kind of eyes as the bank, maybe even some of the same people. The looks that say, you don't fully belong here. The looks that contain judgment, even if it's not verbalized. But Marcus did not adjust his walk. He did not change his bearing. He did not apologize for existing. He felt the eyes and did not react to them. This was the thing he was teaching Zara, the thing Amara had taught him. You do not have to make yourself smaller so that other people feel more comfortable with your presence. Zara led them to a display board. There were watercolor trees, rendered in blue and green and purple. There were crayon self-portraits. There was a clay bird with one wing slightly larger than the other. An accident that Zara had decided to keep, because the accident made the bird look more real, more alive, more true. And in the center of the board was a new drawing, a house under a deep blue sky, 3 figures standing in front of it, holding hands. One of Zara's classmates stopped beside them. She was another 7-year-old, innocent of judgment, moving through the world with the openness that only children had. "Who's that?" the girl asked, pointing to the woman in the drawing. Marcus and Zara exchanged a look. They did not answer for her. They simply waited. Zara lifted her chin. "That's my family," she said. The girl accepted this with the simple ease that children are capable of, when adults don't teach them otherwise. "Cool," she said. "Nice shoes." She was pointing to the feet in the drawing, rendered in Zara's dramatic style. Then she wandered off toward the cookie table. Marcus felt something settle inside him at last, something that had been unsettled since the day he had learned Amara was dying. Something that had been waiting for permission to finally rest. Zara looked at the drawing. She said, "I like the shoes again." Marcus smiled. "They're still dramatic." Zara grinned. "They should be." Victoria entered the gym from the side door. She had brought something with her. A framed print of one of Keisha's designs. Keisha had become a junior designer at one of the city's most prestigious design firms. The print was beautiful, a study in color and form, something that suggested both hope and strength. Victoria had asked if she could donate it to the school art show. The art teacher had said yes. Victoria did not approach Marcus and Zara. She did not insert herself into their moment. She simply stood at a distance and watched. She watched Marcus and Zara stand together. She watched the way Zara held her father's hand. She watched without expectation of being seen. She watched without need for acknowledgement or inclusion. And in that watching, without claim, without insertion, without the demand for recognition, she discovered something new. It was called peace. April 15th came again. The 2nd anniversary of Amara's death. The cycle of the ritual continued. Marcus and Zara sat in a window booth at the ice cream shop near the Hudson River. The light came through sideways, making everything appear golden. The city moved outside the window. People walked past. Cars drove by. The world continued its ordinary business. Zara had strawberry ice cream because strawberry was her mother's flavor. Marcus had vanilla, because vanilla was what he had ordered on the day he first told Amara he loved her. The sunflowers sat on the seat beside them in brown paper, yellow petals catching the same light as Zara's dress. They had already visited the cemetery. They had already left the hand-folded paper boat, with the message written in careful block letters. "Happy birthday, Mommy!" The ritual was proceeding as it always did. Zara worked on her ice cream methodically. She did not speak until she was 3/4 of the way through. Then she set the cone down on a napkin, lined it up carefully so it would not tip, and looked at her father. "Daddy," she said, "that lady in the bank who laughed at us, I kept watching her face the whole time. And I was waiting to feel sad about it. I know I'm supposed to feel sad when people laugh at me. But I didn't feel sad." Marcus set his own cone down. He took a long moment to find the right answer. He had learned over 4 years of raising Zara alone that the right answer was not always the one that came immediately. Sometimes you had to sit with a question for a while before the answer became clear. "When you already know who you are," he said finally, "you don't need anyone else to tell you. When other people try to tell you who you are and they get it wrong, You don't have to correct them. You just have to keep on being who you are. Zara thought about this for the serious length of time that 7-year-olds think about things that matter. She was really thinking about it, not just pretending to be interested. Mom taught you that, she asked. Mom taught me that, Marcus said. So now you're teaching me, Zara said. Yes, I am, Marcus said. They gathered the sunflowers. Zara took her father's hand. Inside the inner pocket of his shirt, folded neatly in half, was the paper envelope from Meridian Trust. With what remained of the $60, some of it had been spent on flowers, some on ice cream. The rest would go into the donation box in the hospital lobby, just as it did every year. Across the city in a building on 5th Avenue, Victoria Hastings sat in her office on the 64th floor. On her desk, the photograph of herself at 19, the girl with the taped shoes, the girl who understood that Ohio was not a destination, but a warning. Next to it, a framed photo of Keisha at her design desk, smiling. Shoes perfectly fine. Hunger transformed into ambition without cruelty. Her assistant brought her a note. The mentorship program had just celebrated its 1-year anniversary. 18 young women, 18 success stories, 18 lives that had been altered by the simple act of someone giving them access, giving them resources, giving them permission to belong in spaces where the world had never told them they belonged. The first cohort was graduating, moving on to positions at major firms, building networks, teaching the next generation. And Keisha, the girl from the Bronx with the taped shoes, had just been promoted to senior designer at one of the city's most prestigious firms. She was not just working there. She was leading there. She was changing the culture from the inside, making it possible for other young women from working class backgrounds to arrive and be seen and be valued. Victoria read the note and felt tears form in her eyes. But these were different tears now, not tears of regret, not tears of shame, tears of witnessing something heal. She picked up the photograph of her younger self. She looked at her own young face for a long time. She had not done this in several months. And then she spoke to that girl. We became something different than you imagined. Not better, not worse. Just different. And that's okay. More than okay. That's real. She set the photograph down gently. The light in her office caught something on her wrist. A simple bracelet, made from beads. The kind of thing a child makes in elementary school. Zara had given it to her 3 months ago with a note. For trying. The truth about wealth, Victoria understood now, was that it did not live in accounts. It did not live in suits. It did not live in red-soled shoes, or in watches on wrists, or in the floor numbers of apartments. It lived in what a person did at the counter of an ordinary bank, on an ordinary Friday morning, when they were standing behind someone they believed had nothing to give them, because everyone sooner or later stands behind someone they misjudge. Everyone stands behind someone they underestimate. Everyone has the opportunity to see a person clearly, or to see them through the filter of their own fears and assumptions. And if you are not careful, the one you find yourself laughing at will turn out to be the clearest mirror you have ever been handed, and the face inside that mirror will be your own. Victoria understood this now. The script does not end with perfect resolution. Perfect resolution is not real. What is real is the ongoing work of becoming different than you were yesterday. What is real is Marcus and Zara walking toward the Hudson River as the sun sets, the light golden and forgiving, the city moving about its business around them, indifferent to their story, indifferent to their journey, but also holding them within itself, containing them, acknowledging their presence. What is real is Victoria reading through applications for the second cohort of the mentorship program. 25 young women this time, each with their own story of hunger and struggle and possibility. She reads each name, she reads each story, and she understands. This is my real work now. This is what Amara would have called important. The story ends not with forgiveness neatly wrapped in a box with a bow. The story ends with two humans. One who has lost everything that mattered and learned to hold on to what remained. One who has had everything and learned that it was never enough. Trying to become better versions of themselves. One through honoring what was lost. One through rebuilding what she destroyed. Both engaged in the real work of grace. Sometimes a family begins with loss. Sometimes a family begins with survival. And sometimes, if you are very lucky, a family begins the moment someone refuses to walk away when leaving would be easier. Marcus and Zara have their family, the memory of Amara, the ritual that keeps her present, the understanding that love continues even after death. Victoria is learning what it means to be part of something larger than herself, to invest in people she will never fully know, to give resources without expectation of return. She is learning that this is harder than accumulating power. She is learning that this is also more real. The script ends with the understanding that becoming yourself is the only job worth doing. The script ends with the understanding that we are all standing in some lobby, laughing at someone we do not understand. And if we are very lucky, we will recognize ourselves in that moment and choose differently if the story stayed with you, even quietly, if it moved something in your chest, if it made you think about the people you have underestimated, or the person you have become when you thought no one was watching, then consider subscribing to our channel. There are more stories here. Stories about grace. Stories about second chances. Stories about the quiet courage it takes to love well, to change genuinely, to become real. Subscribe. Share this with someone you love. And be the kind of person that a 7-year-old would be proud to describe on the walk home.